Happy Easter Monday from Lander, Wyoming, where it snowed on Easter Sunday and was 9 degrees this morning when we got up after the beautiful Easter evening. Today I want to talk about George Herbert's poem, Easter Wings. George Herbert was an Anglican divine who lived in the early 1600s. He was a friend through his mother, who had met John Donne, of that famous English metaphysical poet. And he's interestingly tied to the 20th century's great poet, T.S. Eliot, through Eliot's poem, Little Gidding, which celebrates the Anglican community at Little Gidding that was founded by Nicholas Farrow, who is also an Anglican divine and had high liturgy there that Eliot particularly admired. Herbert wrote a book of devotional poems called The Temple, which he sent to Nicholas Farrow when Herbert himself was on his deathbed in 1633. He was just 39 years old when he died. But he asked Farrow to look at the poems and see if they were worth preserving and to publish them if they were. And of course, they're some of the great treasures of the English language when it comes to religious poetry. Farrow didn't select this poem in particular to promote the volume, but Easter Wings is one of those poems that early on, you want to say, understands the possibilities of the shape of a poem on the page. It's made to be a shape of the birds that Herbert is imagining through the way that he organizes the poem. So notice the poem gets slimmer as it approaches the middle of each stanza and then spreads back out into wings. Lord, who created man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more till he became most poor. With thee, O let me rise, as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. So just a word about this first stanza. This is pretty clearly about the fall of man itself. Lord, who createdst man in wealth and store. 30 years or so after Herbert's death, John Milton would be finishing Paradise Lost, where this whole story is told in great epic detail. But here Herbert is drawing on the sense of the fall as diminishing man. He lost his wealth and store, decaying until he became, those two syllables, most poor. And then the turn, with thee, O let me rise as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories, then shall the fall further the flight in me. If somehow he can be with Christ in his resurrection, then the very fact of the fall will make the flight in him go even further. Now, the second stanza, or the second poem, the way that Herbert had these arranged in the Temple was that these were Easter Wings 1 and Easter Wings 2. Here they're simply published as part of the same poem. My tender age and sorrow did begin, and still with sicknesses and shame, thou didst so punish sin that I became most thin. With thee let me combine and feel thy victory, for if I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. This one is more personal to Herbert, who dealt with illnesses pretty much his whole life, sicknesses and shame. Not sure what the shame is, but certainly the sicknesses came along with the very nature of his constitution, so that I became most thin. Again, with thee, let me combine and feel thy victory. The really salient word in this second stanza is imp, which I think is probably unfamiliar in this use as a verb to most of us. If I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. Apparently in falconry, when a falcon has lost some of its feathers, it's possible to graft feathers onto the wing of the falcon to make up for what's missing. And this is a figurative use of that. If I imp my wing on thine, if I somehow graft my poverty, my thinness, my sin onto you, risen Christ, then affliction shall advance the flight in me. Both of these, interestingly, using the look of the poem on the page, the diminishment, the expansion, to get at the idea of flight and resurrection.